Tamina, is a psychological and mental well-being of the girl. She's not yet ready to be a mother or to be a wife. And very important, what Masala said in her keynote address, is the social construct of education. And the most powerful tool is education. And when a child gets married early, when a girl gets married early, she is deprived of education. And finally, I must say, this is an infringement of her human rights. This is like the State of the World Population Report says, against my will. So this is really this is a violation of a human right. To summarize, you have the medical consequences, the mental and psychological consequences, the social consequences, especially lack of education, and human rights violation.
Great nutshell to frame all of it, Dr. Narima. And moving into Dr. John. Now, your work, Dr. John, focuses very critically on sex education as a precursor to child marriage. Why is this essential, and why have you devoted so much of the work that you do to addressing this specific risk that child brides actually face?
Right. The main thing is, of course, that if you are having a well-educated adolescent and teenagers, they know how to protect themselves, and they can actually prevent unplanned pregnancy. Now, if you look at the natural outcome, a lot of unplanned pregnancy actually end up as adolescent and child brides. So if we can prevent unplanned pregnancy, then we can actually prevent a large majority of child marriages. So I think that is the main thing that I want to emphasize.
Right. Thank you for that, Dr. John. And just to go back into Marcella, who is now all right to speak to us technically wise. Marcella, going back to what I'd asked you, looking at the UNFPA model that emphasizes development across the life cycle, but also for the child, let's discuss the critical impact of child marriage from the UNFPA perspective.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, loud and clear, Marcella.
Yes.
One of the issues that we need to really analyze is what happens to a girl when she gets married. And most likely she will be pregnant very soon. What happens is that for every time that she's pregnant, she will lose at least 2 years of school if she comes back to school. The other thing is that she will be placing her life at risk. There's increased risk of maternal death for younger mothers. And on the other hand, it will also lose the opportunities to continue developing her child. So in a sense, an early marriage for a girl, it's a human rights violation, but it's also creating and limiting the opportunities to develop to a young girl.
That's right. So it really strikes me as something which is so indelibly making a difference to the child's life. 2 years of school lost for every pregnancy. Moving on from there into Prof. Harlina, let's begin with the risk factors for child marriage occurring all the way from social class, geographical location, etc., and what kinds of disadvantages that married girls are actually left with, particularly with the work that you have done so deeply with Radhatu Sakina.
Okay. Thank you, Tamina, for having me. It's really very, it's an honor to be having this opportunity. So most probably, we have to look at the reason why child marriage happened, particularly in Malaysia. 70 years ago when my mother was married off at the age of 13, and this is what the proponent of child marriage says. We've been doing this all year and nothing, they are okay. But of course, that was totally different. It was a union between two families. Even though my father at that time was already close to 30, but it's the family, it's the union between two families. And all the interest of my mother is being looked upon by these two families. But now, even though we still have this marriage due to poverty, to lessen the burden of the family, then the father married the girl off. But most importantly now is actually for those adolescent girls who are pregnant out of wedlock. And when this happened, we still have the concept of, almost immediately the parents would be, starting to look around for solution, and particularly the concept of shame and for the family dignity. So the first thing that they will look upon is actually who is responsible, and if that person can be brought to, marrying this girl, that will be well and good. Okay, even if that means it's still a 17 or an 18-year-old boy.
Exactly.
Okay, as long as somebody is married. And of course, we have the legal process. We'll go to the magistrate, and for some reason, they're being married off. But you have to remember that these two boys and girls, the adolescents, are coming from quite, a dysfunctional family, more or less. Most of the time they're disadvantaged, and when you marry them off, this you are producing another dysfunctional family.
It
And
doesn't solve any problems.
right. And what worries us is that sometimes they are married off to their rapists, for instance, particularly those who are very young. And that is something, I think, the worst that can happen to the girl. And for those who cannot be married off, this is the girls will be sent to our center, to our shelter homes, particularly for a temporary isolation until everything is okay, and they will go back to their school, or most likely they to the colleges. But that is actually what happened.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
So I'd like to go back to Dr. Narima now. Now, in your vast experience serving with not just the government of Malaysia, but in many other countries, how have you found, what are some strategies for actually discouraging parents in seeking child marriage as an escape or a route out, just as Prof. Harlina mentioned, to the consequences of, amongst other things, teenage sexual activity and even teenage pregnancy?
Tamina, I'm so glad that you bring up this issue right at the beginning of this session, the role of the parents. Parenting has got to do with. So there are two things here. Number one is what Prof. Hadina mentioned. When the girl gets pregnant out of wedlock, the first thing the parents want to do is let's get her married, preferably the person who made her pregnant. So that's the girl is already pregnant. They're doing what I call secondary prevention. But more basic than that, if you look at the primary cause, many parents would not oppose child marriage. Some even support it simply because they feel it is an effective way of preventing sexuality before premarital sexuality. So they don't want their children to be committing this sin. Therefore, that, that get her married even if she's young. To me, this is defeating the whole purpose. This is not the right way. I worked in many countries, as you said. I've had challenges. In some of the countries, I found success. Some I did not. Some of my most successful experiences actually in the South Pacific Islands. Yeah. So because the parents, out of religious and cultural influences, want a child to marry to avoid her having sex. So these are the two constructs. One is before she gets into sexual relationship. One is what Prof. Adina said, she's already pregnant. So parental influence is so very important. And parenting, maybe later on we can talk more about the parenting. And before I give back to Tamina, we have seen a lot of studies conducted. Where do young people learn about sex? Today is of course the internet. But before the days of the internet, most studies would say they learn it from their friends who are equally ignorant. Then the internet, then teachers, the last is parents. And of the parents, mothers play a much bigger role than fathers. Fathers hardly ever talk sex to their kids. So parenting is very important.
That's right. So I love the fact that you emphasize on the role of parenting very early on already in the discussion. Dr. John, I'll move into you and your perspectives on the critical need for CSE. Perhaps you could share with us your experiences as you have been based in Sabah for a long time. And also Sabah does have a particularly alarmingly high rate of not just teenage pregnancies, but the connected child marriages.
Yes. When you talk about sexual education, and what we mean is comprehensive sexual education, which is actually a whole realm of things girls and boys about how to protect themselves, about gender equality, about human rights, about health and things like that. And of course, include critically pregnancy pension method. So I think that is actually very critical. It's quite clear already that we know that sexuality education will delay sexual debut, as opposed to the myth that many people think that in same sex they will have more sex. That is actually not true. It's indeed the opposite. The other thing is, of course, we know that there's high, uh, less of these high risk activities if they're actually educated, and of course, ultimately decrease unintended pregnancy, and as I said earlier on, child marriage. So it is that important. That's why I think that is the biggest step in actually preventing the whole spiral of the vicious cycle. The other thing is, I just want to mention, we don't have a lot of data. What we know is that the teenage birth in Malaysia has been on the decline. And it was a peak in 19,000 in 2012, but in 2018, it's gone down to about 10,000, which looks on the surface that we have done very well. But the thing is that that is teenage birth. And we know that teenage pregnancy is not only teenage birth, but actually teenage birth plus abortion plus miscarriage. And we do not have data on those abortion and miscarriage.
That's
And
right.
so this is a big problem in Malaysia. So
Yes,
if
data
we can
collation.
actually prevent all these things, then it will actually help.
Absolutely. So I love the fact that you emphasize data collation as well as some myth breaking over there. Marcella, moving quickly back into you and looking at UNFPA's perspectives from an SDG angle, which wants to eliminate all child marriage by the time 2030 comes. But we're also currently, of course, now living in a COVID-19 recovery phase. A global pandemic has occurred. Let's talk a little bit about and frame the manner in which girls particularly are at increased risk of child marriage because of the global pandemic which has happened.
Yes, I think that first of all, we would like to say that the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals, it's an agenda that was agreed by all the presidents of the world. And what it means is that they selected certain indicators that they all committed to advance and to reach by 2030. This is the minimum agenda of sustainable development. And in exactly in the sustainable development goal number 5.3, there is child marriage. Why child marriage? Child marriage, it is not only, as we said, it is a violation of human rights, but it's not only that. It is a social problem, and also it is a community situation in which the parents have a responsibility, as Dr. Narima said, but also the community. The community needs to raise awareness. The second thing that I want to mention is that we need to see what is the context in which we are living. And we heard and we have examples from our grandparents and sometimes our mothers that were married off very young. But we also have to talk about the population development or the dynamics of the population. Now we live much more than those years, than 50
Right.
years ago. We have increased our life expectancy. More children are alive or less children die, so they survive. Before, at that time, sometimes children died. Many mothers died of delivering or giving birth, and the capacities that we have as societies have increased. So what we are talking about is not only about the human rights, is not only about achieving an agenda, but it's about developing our own population, our potentials of our countries. How do we want to develop the future of a nation? So for UNFPA, it is important to provide these kinds of solutions that have worked in many other countries and support the efforts that you are doing here in Malaysia.
That's right. So on that note, as we have finished the first part of the panel discussion, I'd like to take you all away to a little bit of a segue, which is actually some wonderful, heartfelt messages from familiar Malaysian faces and advocates in support of ending child marriage in Malaysia.
Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Apa khabar? I'm Yuna, and we need to put a stop to child marriage. As Malaysians, it's important for us to empower our young girls and support them and giving them the freedom to paint their own future. Because I believe that children, particularly girls, should have equal opportunity to good education and then grow up to pursue higher education and then lead their lives the way they want to. Child brides are neither physically nor emotionally ready to become wives and mothers. They face more risks of experiencing dangerous complications in pregnancy and childbirth, contracting HIV and AIDS, and worse, suffering domestic violence. So I hope as a nation, as human beings, we will stand together and speak up. We need to change public perception. We need to get family and community support. We need to empower our youths. We need to educate our boys and girls about their rights. And finally, we must enact laws to end child marriages. So let's give these girls a chance, yeah? If they have a chance, they will grow up to be doctors saving lives. They will grow up to be lawmakers. And they will grow up to take my place in the music industry. They can be a Yuna too. And they will grow up to be a leader, who knows? But most importantly, they will grow up to be the woman they aspire to be. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this fight.
Children below the age of 18 are not able to enter into a contract. Child marriage is state-sanctioned pedophilia.
Girls have rights. Girls should have everything that they need in order to become the best possible adult that they can be.
Child marriage is often driven by gender inequality and the belief that girls are somehow inferior to boys.
They are left abused, they are left disempowered, they are deprived of education, health, and safety. She counts because she is human and not an object.
Children are not ready, biologically and medically, to be married. Children are not ready emotionally and socially. It's not ethically or morally correct.
It has been reported as well that child brides are also more susceptible to domestic violence if they enter a marriage at an early age.
How are we, Malaysians, in the year 2020 allowing child marriage to be permissible in the eyes of law when we know better?
As I speak, cases are growing in our country, and this is really appalling. Child marriage should and must be abolished.
This is their reality and will continue to be for many other Malaysians unless we come together to listen, learn, and advocate for the protection of young Malaysians by stepping up against a system enabling child marriage.
Welcome back, and we hope you take those heartfelt messages to ponder upon as we move into the second segment of the panel discussion. This one is though focusing on access to education and healthcare, also two factors which are at critical risk when girls become brides in child marriage. Moving back into our panel session, we'll now bring back our panelists. Thank you for being so patient, and I hope you also watched those messages with the same awe that I did. Prof. Harlina, now moving into education and taking healthcare challenges into account, how do these contribute to child brides and eventual young mothers potentially becoming trapped in a lifelong cycle of poverty, especially from perhaps some of the cases you've worked on with Raudatul Sakina? So a little bit of a technical issue on Professor Harlina's side. We'll move back into one of the other panelists. Let's bring them all back in. And now I'll move into Dato Narima. Dato Narima, speaking of reduced access to healthcare as another outcome of child marriage, could you elaborate how this is actually a risk factor and what outcomes in your working experience the government of Malaysia has been focused on preventing?
Tamina, in fact, if you look at access, it is both a cause and a consequence. So lack of access can bring about child marriage, and once a girl gets married early, she loses some amount of access. And please remember, access is not just to services. I'm talking about access to both knowledge and services. Okay, knowledge, back to CSE, what John has just said, we need sexuality education, comprehensive sexuality education, and we need to keep girls to stay in school. Now, lack of access or barriers to access to services, we in Malaysia, we don't have this problem very much in terms of physical access. 98% of the population is served by aesthetic health facility. We are one of the best in the world, but we do have maybe some other compromised access, especially when it comes to culture and religion. When we talk about access, I talk of the three delays. The first delay should not exist in Malaysia. If it exists, we are really committing a sin. That is, the delay is due to lack of knowledge, due to ignorance. Nobody should be that ignorant today. Number two is they want to go, they are not ignorant, but they cannot go because it's far away, they have no money. Again, Malaysia should not have that problem. We have clinics all over the place and healthcare is free. The third delay may exist in many places in Malaysia. The healthcare providers and the healthcare facility is not client friendly. The poor young girl comes to the clinic and asks for education, asks for information. She's not given the information. And of course, we have to address that by giving skills and knowledge to our healthcare providers. So to summarize, Tamina, access, physical access is not much of a problem, except in the area of maybe Sabah Sarawak. But we do have constraints to access because of culture, because of religion, and because of poor provider preparation and competence in giving the service.
Thank you, Dr. Narima. Moving back into Prof. Harlina, what we couldn't hear earlier, but let's just repeat through that. So what is it, some of the factors which actually contribute to these young mothers becoming stuck in this lifelong cycle of poverty, in your experience working with Radhatul Sakina?
Yeah, Tamina, definitely when their lack of education, they will be having a lot of challenges in making decision. This is really important decision in their life, like deciding that they are not going to be married, and well, if that is something that they cannot decide because somebody else is deciding for them, then they got married to this man who's not going to listen to her. And the next thing you know that she's going to be pregnant and she gets pregnant again, and of course one after another, and you can only break this if you can have access for education, and that is why everybody must be looking into the adolescent girls' interests, of their best interests. Of course, the first one should be the parents at the first layer. And of course, the next one would be the authority, or the magistrate who's going to decide in that courtroom for child marriage to happen. So, and this is actually what is missing. We always forget about the adolescent girl. So, I think not only education is important for the girls, but also for all of us, particularly parents and the rest of the society who's supposed to look after the adolescent girls.
That's right. Marcella, I'll come into you now from the UNFPA's perspective also on how education actually forms the most powerful tool, as you mentioned in your keynote presentation. Why is it that education empowers not just the community, but also the girls themselves to be able to say no to child marriage?
Well, I think that information and education empower young people to make their own decisions. They need to know what are these decisions going to make for them, and for their lives, and also for those children that are going to become their family and their children that they will need to raise. And I believe that we talk about something else that we haven't spoken. Child marriage exposes these young girls to be abused, to receive violence, to even sexual violence, even rape. And it is a something very strong because it also talks about how much we value girls in societies. And it's not about Malaysia, it's about a situation that it's around the world.
That's right.
And when we value more boys than girls, we usually give boys a different role and a different position in society than girls. And girls have less opportunity to make decisions for themselves. But we are in a world today where boys and girls need to make decisions for themselves and for their future. Comprehensive sexuality education, age appropriate, culturally appropriate sexuality education, it's the backbone for them to ensure that they will be making the decisions with the correct information. As Dr. Teo mentioned already, there is evidence from UNESCO that says that comprehensive sexuality education actually influences the delay of the initiation of sexual intercourse, the decreased frequency and the decreased number of partners at a younger age, and reduces many other risks of, for example, preventing a pregnancy. So it is really important that all of these information and education, as well as the services, like as Dr. Narima was mentioning, are made available for the young people for their making the right choices and decisions for themselves.
That's right. Thanks for that, Marcella. Dr. John, moving back into you. You had mentioned just a little bit earlier about the critical need for CSC and also the fact that you need to look at where teenagers, young people are actually getting their access to sexuality resources. Let's talk about social media, increasing internet access, and also sexualization of children and teens along social media, and how that also proves to be a risk factor in not just child marriage, but also early sexual relationships without the proper background.
Yes, I think in this day and age, social media can be actually a double-edged sword. You know, it can actually provide you the right information if you know where to get the right information and if you're directed to the right information. On the other hand, it can actually lead you to path that you do not want to go. And there's many teenagers who are on WeChat, on Facebook Messenger, and things like that, and they just simply meet strangers and things like that. And so, of course, the risk of unsafe sexual behavior and things come about. I think this is the biggest problem we have to tackle, and that to see how we can actually educate them. Again, everything falls back to education. The other thing I just want to quickly mention is that, as mentioned earlier, is that when you talk about access, access to knowledge is always there. It's the question of directing them to the correct access. But the other thing is, of course, there is a rising incidence of teenage sexual activity as well. And in 2014, you got about 4.8% of teenagers were sexually active. And in 2018, it goes to 7.3%, which is roughly about 150,000 sexually active teenagers. And this presents a major problem because they got very lack of access to sexual reproductive health services and things like that. And back to the problem of unintended pregnancy and then marriage. You see, so it's this part that we really
Just
also
a
need to
cycle.
pay
That's right.
big attention. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Dr. John, from you, I'd like to move into Prof. Harlina, speaking about what needs to be done to improve education and healthcare, particularly for CSC, but in a culturally sensitive manner, and perhaps your ideas on how the particularly vulnerable urban poor group of marginalized girls can be addressed, because they are the most likely to fall pregnant early as children and as a consequence also be married off?
Okay, there's a lot of things to do still, Tamina, and as John was saying earlier, that the taboo of, when you educate and giving sexuality education, then our adolescents are going to be more promiscuous, they are going to be, more sexually active, and I guess we need to correct this misconception first, and definitely we have to start with the parents, and I think that's the way to change mindset, because to me the parents are the low hanging fruit, and this is just to convince them that sexuality education is not just about teaching our adolescent how to have sex, but that really and still the main understanding about sexuality education. So and this is going to be, it takes time, but we have to persevere and move on. Usually I will say that, sexuality itself is actually having just, well, not just one dimension. There is actually at least 5 dimensions. I will go very quickly.
Sure.
Yes, of course, physical, and that's what they think about whenever you talk about sexuality education. But it's not just that. There is this the second one, cognitive and intellectual dimension. The most important sexual organ is the brain, Tamina, not not your genitalia. And then of course the other one would be the emotional dimension. That positive emotion of being loved and the mutual and feeling, not really being hurt and being more or less displaced, or whenever you are having sexual relationship. And you have the social dimension as well, because we
That's
need to
right.
interact. And finally, and this is where the catch, it also have the spiritual and religious dimension. Okay, and usually when you bring that in, suddenly the parents starts to see, oh, hold on, this
That's
is really
right.
something very important. And my analogy would be like, this is a big house called sexuality. Inside this big house there are 5 rooms which are equally big. One is physical, cognitive, all that, and then we have to sort of look into all this area. So the next time when your child asks you something on sexuality, look into this house and ask yourself, which dimension is this? And you will see that the parents are more empowered, and that would
That's
be the
right.
low hanging fruit, Tamina.
All right. I love the way that you analogize it, and at the same time what you use. It's a house and it has to be holistic, else the roof falls down. Well said indeed. So I would like to go back to Dato Narima from there, looking at, of course, the current scenario. What would be some of the best harm reduction models that we could perhaps apply, particularly to target B40 and urban poor, rural Malaysia, even East Malaysia and East Coast Malaysia, where we have much more vulnerable populations of girls at risk for child marriage?
Tamina, in fact, the answer to that question has already been given in our conversation in your question as well. Harm reduction modalities or practices, which are the most potentially effective. I would put legislation as quite low. Not to say the law is not important, but very important. We have mentioned over and over again, education. Back to education, education, education. Then number 2, of course, poverty reduction. So there is a poverty amelioration or eradication, because there is enough evidence all over the world that it is family poverty that brings about a child, a young girl especially, being married off very young. We remembered about the 11-year-old girl in Kelantan who was married off to a 41-year-old man, and later on we learned that it was really the family needed the money. 41-year-old man gave them money. It was like almost selling of their daughter. So the most effective is education. The second is poverty reduction. And then we go to other things, and that would include legislation. Maybe later on we're going to cover the national strategic plan. If you look at the Malaysia, I'm very proud of what we have done. The then Minister of Women, who was then Deputy Minister,
That's right.
and Muhammad Hanayo, that time leading the ministry, they went on what they did not say. We want to pass the law to make marriageable age not less than 18. They did that as well. But
That's right.
before that, they paid more attention. Let's address the causes, the factors that led to child marriage. So those are the most effective harm reduction. Then we talk about the law.
Absolutely, very well emphasized. Marcella, I'd like to ask you, in your vast experience with the UNFPA, especially regionally, are there any best practice harm reduction models that are working particularly well in the ASEAN region? Something that perhaps Malaysia could look towards emulating or replicating successfully even more at home?
There are many initiatives and there are many policies that have been put in place that can really support. Even there's work that has advanced, for example, in Indonesia. I believe that there are three things that we need to target when we target this issue as a society. First of all, we need to open up the space for the dialogue. And I think that the dialogue is, as Prof. Harlina very well said, with the parents, but also with the institutions, but also we need to bring in the religious leaders from the different religions. I think it is truly important because they are in the community and they guide. We need to understand that the population also has these this is not only a tradition, but it's also part of their way of living. So it's very important that everyone comes together. The second thing is that we have to understand that children also have rights, and that there is a moment in which adults stop making decisions for children. Even if we believe that we make decisions for children, they will learn somewhere and they will go ahead and make their own decisions. So what we should try to do is to establish the platforms and ensure that they have the legislation that protects them, that they have the information and the education that provides them the tools to make the decisions, and they have the services that they can access to look for support and to look for services. And I'm not only talking about prevention of pregnancy or how to have sex, as Prof. Harlina put it in some words. No, I'm talking about things that are happening, for example, to little girls that are being raped by people close to their homes, and they just don't know who to turn to and tell them. And even at certain points that the girls are married to the rapist. So I think that there are many policies to close this segment, but there are many policies that we can learn. But the most important thing is to open the conversation in place and to really make actions to address this issue.
More open doors, definitely. Thank you, Marcella. On that note, we seg you into another short special presentation of messages that we have collated from advocates for ending child marriage in Malaysia. Let's have a look.
Hi, I'm Marina Mahathir. I was reading a Twitter thread today by a local obstetrician and gynecologist talking about how he was helping to deliver a baby by a mother who was only between 11 and 13 years old. And it was so shocking and sad because he said that the mother, the so-called mother, the girl, couldn't really understand what was happening to her. She didn't understand when the nurse told her to push. And when the baby was delivered and given to her, she referred to it as adik, or little brother or sister. She did not see herself as the mother of this baby, only as an older sister. I felt incredibly sad about this case, not least because the difference between the mother of this baby and her child was only about 11, 12, 13 years old. And that's exactly the difference between the ages of my two daughters. And I cannot imagine anyone having to go through the pain of labor and everything that entails pregnancy and giving birth. When those of us, even as adults, those of us who have babies as adults, already find it a difficult process. This young mother, this child mother, had a baby as a result of rape. But there are also many who are having babies as a result of marriage, usually forced onto them by their parents. They will still undergo the same pain. And I think it's not fair and unkind to let our girls go through this. So we must end child marriage.
In 2020, child marriage is still a serious global issue, affecting millions of children, predominantly young girls.
Despite all the challenges that we've overcome through the years, the fact remains that we continue to live in a country that allows for underage innocent children to be married with the full protection of the law.
The law is not doing enough to protect children against this damaging cycle. Even though it may not be happening in our own circles, it's definitely widely happening here in Malaysia, especially to young girls.
When a young girl becomes a bride, the consequences are lifelong for the girl, her children, and her nation as a whole.
Children deserve to have childhoods, they deserve their innocence, and they deserve to be happy.
We don't talk about it, and it's really very much taboo, but it happens. It has been happening and will continue to happen unless we stop it.
Mereka belum boleh lagi dari segi fizikal dan mental untuk menggalas tugas sebagai seorang isteri, seorang ibu, suri rumah. Biarlah mereka membesar macam budak-budak lain.
Welcome back. Thanks for still staying with us. If you're just joining us, this is UNFPA's special panel discussion session in conjunction with the State of the World Population Report for the Malaysian market, actually focusing upon child marriage. We've been discussing the causes as well as possible solutions in the Malaysian narrative with our list of illustrious panelists. Moving into the third segment of the panel now, which focuses on strengthening laws to protect children and to reach UNFPA's goal of zero child marriage by 2030 in accordance with the UN SDGs. Marcella, before we move on even further into the legislation and law and what changes can be made, I'd like to go deeper into the topic you broached a little bit earlier, which was that one of the fundamental root causes of child marriage impacting girls so severely is the gender inequality that perpetuates from birth itself.
Yes, I think that efforts are being made by our governments, but we will see that these will face limitations if we don't really address the cultural issues of gender inequality. And it has to do with the different relations of power, and this really affects how women and men make decisions or have the rights to make decisions or are perceived by the society to have the rights to make decisions about themselves, make decisions about how much or where do they invest what they earn, how many children they will have. And all of this has to do with how we value in a society women and men. So we need to really tackle in our cultural practices, where is it that we are seeing these practices of that promote gender inequality? And the place where we can make this change is in the homes. It's as Prof. Hardina said, at the house is where we can really train the new society with cultural values that really give a place with dignity for living the life free of violence and free of fear to women and to men and to girls and to boys.
That's right. Thank you, Marcella. And now moving into native customary law in Sabah, Dr. John, regarding the high incidence of child marriages and also the very encouraging step of the state government in increasing the marriage age to 18 in 2019. Any perspectives perhaps on why, at the same time though, Sarawak has not done the same, and what could be some of the pull factors in their situation?
Right. I think it's a complex problem because it intersects between the various law. We got the civil law, and we got the Sharia law, and of course the native customary law in states like Sabah and Sarawak. So I'm very glad that the Sabah government has made the decision to try to synchronize all these law so that marriage is only legal after 18 years old, and that's really what the law is supposed to do, is to protect young girls and to protect them from all this tragedy and the negative outcome. As for Sarawak, it's a bit difficult to comment from here, but what I would say is, of course, I'm sure they're trying and they may be taking the time because the complexity of the state and all those things may be actually making the process a bit slower.
Understood. I'll come back to you on a slightly different point in a little while. Prof. Harlina, meanwhile, speaking about the wider Peninsula Malaysia, there are still 7 states that haven't increased the minimum age of marriage to 18. And what kind of current and future difficulties, though, will these states face through the refusal to increase the age of child marriage?
Okay. Samina, that is quite, I would say, a legal question for me as an obstetrician, but I'll try to answer that. I happen to be involved in a research together with my colleagues from the Faculty of Law and from Institute Hadari, UKM, where we're looking into this minimum age of, from 16 going up to 18. And but before I answer the 7 states that have not, the states that have actually increased the age limit to 18, like Selangor, have done so after a few level of process. One of it, which I was involved, is to educate the magistrate and the legal officers as to what happened to these girls that they have given, their more or less a green light for them to proceed with marriage. When they what happened outside their chamber, and it is what the stories of the old having birth. My experience, the youngest was a 13-year-old, and when she was having this contraction, instead of lying down on the bed, she was running around in the labor room, and it's really heartrending to see that because she couldn't understand what was happening to her. So educating this is very important. Okay, and then of course through that they start to see how can they improve the standard operating procedure, and that is after increasing it to 18, they look into the aspect of health, of education, of the well-being of the adolescent girls. Now suddenly that is what the court has to do. That is to decide on the best interest of the girl. So for those who have not that 7 states, I think we must go on knocking
That's
on
right.
doors, making engagements, so that they will focus on the adolescent girls, not the parents, not other people, but the girls.
That's right. Important to keep those doors open and to keep pressing forth with the agenda. Dr. Narima, I want to move back into you, and this time digging a little bit deeper. As you'd mentioned, the long-awaited 5-year National Strategy Plan in handling the causes of child marriage was launched just in January 2020. Of course, that was pre-pandemic, but all in it had 7 objectives, 17 strategies, 58 programs, all aimed at addressing root causes of child marriage. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about how some of these will be able to make the most difference if we keep at least for the upcoming 5 years, Dr. Narima?
Thank you, Tamina. But can you give me an extra half minute before I answer your question?
Certainly.
To go back to the earlier question of harm reduction practices that you asked both Marcella and I just remembered I was so inspired when I met a group of Indonesian ladies, Muslim women, who call themselves, I think they call themselves Kopi or something like that, Kumpulan Ulama Perempuan Indonesia. They have formed a group and they made a case to the Fatwa Council of Indonesia. And I like the approach because not only it is culturally sensitive, it is very creative. They said if we tell the people to allow your daughter to marry early adalah haram, they will look at it in a very negative manner. They don't like the word wajib or haram or sunnah to be in the fatwa. So what they have done was they told the Fatwa Council, I want a fatwa that sounds like it is haram for any parent to expose your child to any dangerous practice.
That's right.
And that was taken very well. I thought it was very great. Okay,
Yes.
to your question, Tamina, I think, like I
Sure.
said earlier on, whilst the law is very important, and I really appreciate what Halina has explained to us, we have to go back to the
Absolutely.
7th state to really raise the marriage age from 16 to 18, but the law has its own problem. But what the Ministry of Women, Family and Community did was brilliant. They did not say we want to have a law against child marriage. We want to address the causes of child marriage. There are 5 or 6 causes,
That's
and
right.
there are 7 objectives, 17 strategies, and 58 programs or actions, which of course I cannot remember. But I do know that the first strategy, or the first factor, sorry, first causal factor is poverty. So
That's right.
poverty eradication is a very important. Let me go back to my note. And the second one is, of course, John has just said very clearly, comprehensive sexuality and reproductive health education. TSE, maybe I'll steal another half a minute, Damina, because I want to
Sure.
tell you about my personal experience. When I was asked to chair the National Committee on Introducing Sex Education in School, way back in the year 2002, one of the Ustad in my committee said, he said it in Malay, but in English it sounds like this. Dr. Narimah made sure whatever is taught in the school curriculum is not only adultery or zina or illicit sex, haram, anything that brings around or brings about or encourages illicit sex is haram. Then I told him, yes, that I do understand what you mean, but it's not easy because the school teachers will have to come up with a curriculum. What other things that lead to zina? I will not go into that, but just to say how difficult sexuality
Exactly.
is. My second experience was in the South Pacific Island. I was one before I went to Fiji. You meeting with church leaders who said no sex education. So the church leaders told me, Dr. Narima, it is against the will of God to teach. I said, sir, I'm not going to teach sex. I'm going to teach children why they must not have sex. And many years later, somebody came to me and said, one delegate from the South Pacific Island in Geneva went to the rostrum and said, it's against the will of God not to do that. I cried, when I heard that. I really cried because, Marcella, I did this with UNFA. So going back to your question, yes, poverty eradication. Number 2 is sex education. Number 3 is general education in school. The girls must finish school. Number 4 is, I think, social stigma and discrimination. We should address that. Number 5 is the law, raising the age to 18. Number 6 is the data. I will not go into number 6. Of the 58 actions, we don't have time to talk about that now. All I need to say is that there are so many. We'll have to prioritize them. What is urgent? What is important? What is doable? What is feasible? What will have most impact? And what will cost less money? So that's going to be a huge task for the committee, for the ministry and other agencies.
That's right, absolutely. And thank you so much, Dr. Narima, for not just sharing your personal experiences, but really contextualizing it also from a faith-based perspective. I love what you shared about the Indonesian female ulamas group and how they were able to really put forth their point from a do no harm perspective. No parent, no family, no society, no religion, no culture wants harm done to their girls, to their children. And when we're able to best frame that, I think that's when the doors truly open up. From there, I'd like to move into Marcella. Marcella, Malaysia has been a signatory to the CEDAW since 1995. And 25 years on, where does Malaysia stand or rank when it comes to CEDAW's principles in relation, of course, to addressing gender inequality and also reducing child marriage one of the huge factors and consequences?
I think Malaysia has made many advances in CIDAO, and in the latest reports, there are even recognition of some of the things that they have reported, and particularly the establishment of the institution for the advancement of women and advancing certain laws. But still, there are certain gaps, and in this case, I want to refer to the issue of child marriage. It's the Article 16, and what that it says, and I'm going to read it. It says, it gives it states that women should have the same right as men to freely choose a spouse and to enter into marriage only with their free and full consent, and that the betrothal and marriage of a child shall have no legal effect. And this recommendation is still reserved. Reserved means that it's still not accepted by Malaysia, and there's also conversations on how to address the issue. The issue of child marriage should not be seen as an imposition from outside. The issue of child marriage should be as a an interest of really bringing all the opportunities to develop the full potential of the girls and the boys of Malaysia so that they can become full citizens to their full potential.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And from there, thank you, Marcella. Prof. Harlina, in the meanwhile, religious authorities have released interim guidelines which make it compulsory for applications for underage Muslim marriages to be heard at the Sharia High Court. Do you feel this process will actually help in ensuring that fewer children are married off?
Okay, Tamina, I would like to echo what Datuk Narima said in the beginning, where the legal process or law can be a part of the solution, but it will only play, to me, a small part of it. Well and good that to me, this new development shows that there's light at the end of the tunnel. That at least we are all thinking about the interests of the adolescents, boys and girls. Yeah. But I guess many more things has to be done, and particularly in going into the whole process of it, the multi-pronged strategy. It has to come together. Most probably, this is where I would look at teenage pregnancy, where child marriage is part of it, has to be seen, as a spectrum. Before they are sexually active, to me, you can prevent that through education to the adolescent and to the parents. But once they're sexually active, then I guess that preventive measure would take a back seat. Now is harm reduction, and one of it is this is where I'm speaking as an obstetrician and gynecologist. You see, when they are having sex, they are not going to be pregnant immediately. Most of them would only become pregnant after repeated exposure, and this is the time where the most pragmatic is actually to have good contraceptive practice. And this means, to me, most probably empowering the boys to be very responsible. Okay. Now, when they are pregnant, of course, in the early part, I think John was saying just now about abortion. I'm not actually going to, after this, Pro Halina is actually, proposing that we should allow abortion. I think we should be able to see this in a better picture. But abortion become, something that can stop the pregnancy from going on. And of course, we have to deal with whatever concern that we have culturally, religiously, this matter. Once they are pregnant and they are a bit too far in the pregnancy, this is when you might, shelter homes like Ratu Sakinah will take, their role. And finally, when they become and then when they delivered, and this is when, either they are going to be supported by the family or the baby is going to be adopted and not baby trafficking, I hope. And the one most important thing is to prevent any abandonment of babies. So this is in the nutshell. So I guess this is the last question, Tamina. So I more or less conclude. Thank you.
That's right. Thanks so much, Prof. Harlina. And so far, Dr. John, very quickly going back into you on how to refocus and redirect National Health Compass with children at the center, especially those who are made vulnerable to teenage pregnancy and child marriage, while we also are in the wings for more legal reform.
Right. I think we have actually said it a few times during this discussion. That is basically refocus on implementing evidence-based solution. I think that that's very, very important. And of course, as mentioned earlier, also poverty and low education are the main drivers of child marriage. So if we can address this twin problem, then there is much chance in us trying to decrease the incidence of child marriage. The other thing is, of course, the law and things like that will come into it. But there's a lot of things I feel that we can do right now that us as a community can do by educating the parents, by educating the schools, the communities, and things like that. And those are the things that are within reach, and those are the things that are most effective in actually preventing child marriage. And we can start right now.
That's right. Thank you so much, Dr. John. Marcella, I'd like to propose one last question to you before we go around all the panelists, just asking for your overall feedbacks and opinions on this session. Marcella, on behalf of UNFPA, your message addressing child marriage, also in conjunction with World Population Day 2020, which happens to fall tomorrow, 11th of July.
Yes, Amina, thank you very much. And this year, this Population Day, we are going to be talking about women and girls and what has happened and what impact has brought to their life the situation of the pandemics of COVID-19. And we are really advocating to address the issues of gender-based violence. Many women and girls during this pandemic and during the situations of the movement restrictions have increased the situations of violence against women and girls. And there has not necessarily been a part of the response of the government. Sexual reproductive health has also not been part of the response of many primary support from the health services. And this, what we are looking at is possibly in the following months, we are going to be looking at about 13 million child marriages still coming up in the following few months. And we are also going to be looking at an increase of women and girls that are going to live in violence, that are going to probably be pregnant of a result of sexual violence. And these are all the issues that we want to bring into the attention. These are things when gender-based violence, or particularly when sexual violence occurs in a home, it doesn't only affect it affects the family, it affects not for one time, it affects it for life, it affects the community, and it affects the country. It becomes a social ill. And I think we all want to stop these kinds of situations. So tomorrow, as we commemorate this World Population Day, we want to raise this kind of awareness. What is COVID-19 really teaching us? And what is the response that we need to do?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the strong message, Marcella. Dr. Narima, I move to you with your final message as we come to the close of this essential panel on ending child marriage in Malaysia.
Okay, Tamina. Therefore, in summary, we have gone through the what. What is the problem? The problem is child marriage. We know the why. Why does child marriage occur? There are many reasons. And therefore, now, very urgently, very importantly, we have to see the how. We know the what, we know the why. Let's see the how. And we have discussed a lot of the how. I'd like to summarize, I'd like to focus on education again. Again, to me, poverty eradication and education are the two main strategies Of course, the legal process will have to go on, raising the age of marriage to 18. Back to education, can I just summarize it into four domains? The first one is the whole education system and philosophy in this country needs to be changed. We are focusing too much on academic subjects, on STEM, science, technology, mathematics. We're not paying more attention to the humanities, for example. We're not paying attention to life skill development, to have this holistic person, young child to grow up into an adult with life skills, with the right value system, not just knowing academic subjects and getting 9 A's or 10 A's. There's a first domain. The second domain is sex education itself in school. We have gone through this. John has mentioned that, and I mentioned to you about my experience in Malaysia, my
That's right.
experience in the South Pacific Island was very. The third domain is of course parenting. Up till 2 weeks ago, I was the chairman of the LPPN, and Marcella and I were already UNFPA and LPPN. We were already holding hands to review our parenting and sex education modules. We have sex education. I don't have time to talk about that now, but we have a module for parents called Chakna Diri or caring parents. And UNFPA, I must thank Marcella for giving us a lot of help for that. So we need to really, really do more parenting education and how for them to teach sex education to their children. And finally, the fourth domain day is the whole area that John is on, is what I call the good, the bad, the ugly of social media. You can do
That's
a lot
right.
of good, a lot of bad things, there are a lot of ugly things. And in the 5-year strategic plan, I think it must be mentioned somewhere. And I think the ministry also doing a lot of things about looking at texting, grooming, and the bad effects of social media. So that in summary is the how we need to move.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Narima. That was a really, really focused nutshell of issues. Prof. Harlina, I'd like to move into what your final message is to all of us, to all Malaysians watching us on the event of this very important panel on ending child marriage in Malaysia once and for all.
Okay, thank you, Tamina. I have 2 points here. For the sake of our adolescents, we must never give up. We must go on with our advocacy, and we must try to collaborate with all our partners, and we must engage. And knocking doors, they might still be, shut in front of us, for the sake of our adolescents, because they are really our future. To me, if we can actually prevent one child marriage today, we are actually going to more or less save that part of the generation that is going to be coming, coming in from the girl that we just saved. My second point would be, um, I really hope that all the effort that's being done by LPPKN, under the leadership of Datuk Narima, and what has been more or less, 58 strategies and program for addressing child marriage. That is really wonderful, but I guess we really need to have the right people, the right team, and the right context to be moving on, and I pray that we will get that very soon, and that will involve all of us. Thank you.
So to all of us, and as you said, she counts. Every girl, all girls. Dr. John, your final message before we wrap up this wonderful interactive panel session on addressing child marriage causes, particularly in East Malaysia, Sabah, where you're based, and what can be done right now.
Yeah, I think if we echo enough how many times we said education, and if we echo enough that if we can try to decrease the poverty, perhaps we will make an advancement. And I'm sure we did. And I think this is my final message, is that we need to educate with facts, and we need to educate with things that are true. So if we have got the facts, then all our teenagers can be protected, and all our teenagers can actually have the best potential in
Wonderful.
Sabah and in every state in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. John. Thank you so much to all our panelists, Marcella, Dr. Narima, Prof. Harlina, Dr. John. You've all been wonderful, taken so much time out of your busy schedules and given us such concise nutshells, such nuggets of not just information, knowledge, facts, data, statistics, but most importantly, you've given us a little piece of your heart. And we thank you for your continued and continuing efforts in protecting not just our girls, but also ending child marriage. So there you have it. And we will be back once again after this last batch of really heartfelt messages from our Malaysian advocates speaking up against child marriage. I urge you to open not just your heart, your ears, but your eyes, and to truly listen to what they have to say. We'll see you again shortly.
In Malaysia, underage children are allowed to be married under the full protection of the law. I just want you to know this. When you marry off an 11-year-old girl, you are exploiting the most vulnerable and youngest people in our society. You take her away from school, from her education, from her dreams. You take her away from her mom, her family, her friends. You subject her to violence. You trap her in abusive relationships. You are isolating her instead of protecting her. You subject her and her future children into poverty. Child marriage is not a legitimate solution to sexual impropriety. Education is. My name is Siti Aisyah. When Michelle Obama asked me, "Why do you do this?" I said, "It is in my name." Every second, men and women all over the world use my name to commit crime against girls. They marry them off at the age of 9, 10, 11, 12 because the Prophet allegedly married Aisha when she was 9. Well, this Aisha is saying, girls are not brides. Let us all work together, providing a better future, a better Malaysia for all our girls. We must make sure she knows that she counts.
Over 12 million girls a year are married off before the age of 18 globally. And unfortunately, this harmful and extremely devastating practice is still prevalent and legal here in Malaysia.
Younger girls are not allowed to frolic and enjoy their youth as I once did. I condemn the widely accepted practice of child marriage in this country.
Forcing a child, coercing them to enter into marriage with a man is giving that man the right to rape them every single day.
These decisions are most often influenced by the stigma surrounding sexuality and teen pregnancies. It sounds like an archaic thought process, but unfortunately, quite a number of people in Malaysia still feel that way.
What is in the way is antiquated socio-religious practices, totally unnecessary stigma, and the lack of comprehensive sexuality education.
You can only vote in elections and drive a car at 18 years old. Why should there be exceptions for marriage? It is my hope that child marriage is completely banned in Malaysia to ensure a child's right to education.
This comes down to one of our most basic and precious rights, our right to choose. This right belongs to everyone, especially our children.
As adults, we are the guardians of their rights. It's 2020, guys. It's time for us to play our role as the protectors and not their violators.
Thank you for joining us on this special presentation of the annual State of the World Population Report by the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. Now, we have comprehensively discussed child marriage in Malaysia, its prevalence, the underlying causes, including poverty, gender discrimination, and a lack of universal sexual and reproductive healthcare and rights, or SRHR, access for girls. We've also framed the damaging outcomes of child marriage: physical, emotional, psychological, maternal health, and childcare complications for girl brides. Now, it's also important to remember that when girls are marginalized, the economy suffers, hindering national development agendas. Child marriage robs girls of living their best lives. It also robs Malaysia of a future filled with high-achieving women, leading to a more productive economy and society. It truly is in our hands to ensure that this is the kind of Malaysia we help create for girls. Let's thus join together to educate, to raise awareness, and to end child marriage, because she counts.
In the Caribbean in general, and certainly here, men like to say after 12 is lunch. For a long time, 12 meant you were an adult.
Before I married him, I was like a person and I had an idea of like who I wanted to be. And after I married him, I just didn't even feel like a person anymore. I just felt like, I was somebody's property.